Topping Talks.
Let's see it.
105 hours a week, can't be beat. Welcome to Topping Talks. Topping Talks is a Topping Tribune production, and today's episode is proudly sponsored by Topping Technologies. Topping Technologies is an IT value-added reseller and services company with a special proficiency in IT security. Heck, I see their founder at least twice a day. Gotta say he's quite handsome and brilliant. He's me, you see, that's a joke. If you're an IT leader or business owner, you can reach out to the team at sales@toppingtechnologies.com. Also, we're giving away a free Flamethrower with every IT purchase. Go to toppingtechnologies.com and click the Flamethrower button to learn more. And yes, it does come with a standard AR-15 Piccadilly rail adapter, so you can attach it to any standard AR-15, as all awesome accessories can be done. Now, without further ado, today I'm proud to say I'm interviewing Mitch Chapman, who is an entrepreneur in cybersecurity services space, as well as in risk mitigation in the insurance industry. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Mitch.
Hey, Nick. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
So, winding back the clock a couple years, how did you first get into IT?
You know, so my uncle, whenever I was probably a teenager, had an IT services company that they pulled cable for a lot of the municipalities and school systems. So in the summertime, I spent time with him doing that, and that just kind of drew me into being a little bit of a IT geek in youth. So kind of fast forward, I get a gig with a outsourcer for HP printer support.
I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it was like, back then, I believe it was like the 690s DeskJet printers that they had. So it was like, phone support. Literally, people are calling in, and I'm talking about, their driver for the printer, do you have the cable plugged in? And it's out of ink. I mean, just all that stuff, right? And so what was cool about it is it kind of brought me to a place where I learned how to, be a diagnostic technician, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. So you're on the phone, and I can't see anything. I've just got to ask the right questions. So that was the foundational basis of me getting into IT at that point, was with that gig.
Oh my gosh, I must have built a lot of character. I was gonna say, do you remember the worst call you ever had in terms of like a curveball, or like what on earth is going on with this printer?
So I remember calls that were challenging. I wouldn't say necessarily like a worst call, but one that was particularly challenging, if I take my memory back to that point, was I had been on the phone with this elderly lady for a while, like 45 minutes, right?
Oh, wow.
And so I'm asking my supervisor, how long do I stay on, right? And we're like going to close at 11 o'clock, I think is what it was. So there was like 15 minutes to go. And so all these other technicians just joined the call, right? To like sort of trying to like get this thing closed out, And so I think it was a matter of, at that point, she had to, like cycle the printer or something like that. We'd gone through all these different steps, but that was definitely one of the longer calls. And whenever I was young, now, we routinely see calls that are well over an hour, right? I mean, that's not abnormal.
Well, a different subject though. I mean, cybersecurity is, self-printer,
Yeah, the printer should be something. I mean, nowadays, if we can't figure out our printer within 5 minutes, we're boxing it up, taking it back, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's got to be able to, auto connect and have all of the different features that we want. Print from my phone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then what was it like working at that ISP or the MSP rather? Do you enjoy the challenge of working with multiple customers? Because for folks who aren't aware with cybersecurity or aware with the IT industry, that basically means you're taking care of IT for all other folks, and in this case is on the printer side of the business.
Yeah.
And in this case is the HP contract.
Right, exactly. So this company had the entire HP consumer contract.
Oh, Jesus.
Right. So there was people that were working scanners, right? There was people that were working, LaserJet printers, et cetera, right? So I just happened to drop into the DeskJet support group, right?
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So then as I'm going through that, I would say, some of the foundational elements of it that I remember that were cool was working with people that had been doing that for a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're like a dinosaur in that business, and I'm just a youth, just starting my first foray into it. And I think some of the other things that went on were just, my first opportunity to learn how that industry worked, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I had been basically a young consumer of IT, and that's it, right? By means of, building a computer here and there or whatever. And so you get pushed into that, and it's a whole different world, right? I do remember calls that would come in, and it would be, something like absolutely irate customer, right? Which that's, character building in those early days of like, how do you deal with an irate customer, right? And I mean, now we look in, nowadays, I mean, that's like an interview question, right? So what do you do? Tell me about your worst customer, right? How did you handle it? All that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that's really where I, cut my teeth on that side of the, understanding how to talk to people and be empathetic, be patient. And so, going into it, years later, I mean, I've been in a lot of different big companies, small companies, you name it. But those skills I've taken with me the whole time, right? Just being able to listen to people and understand all that kind of stuff.
Invaluable skills. That'd be a good first step for anyone trying to get an IT or just getting a professional career in general. Work troubleshooting.
Really?
Because you'll learn patience. You'll learn it. It might take a little while, but you'll get there.
Yeah, you will. Absolutely. And for me, my first job was actually with a fast food company called Burger Street here in Dallas back in the day. I think they still have some locations, but I started there when I was 15.
Oh, wow.
So I got a summer gig with them, and I wasn't even allowed to go in the kitchen because I was young, right? So I had to work there for a year before I could go in and do that whole thing. So everything else, I'm like just cleaning stuff and working in the parking lot, all that kind of thing. But that was another place where, you build up that skill set of, listening and, just doing simple tasks.
Oh, yeah.
So I think, everyone should have the opportunity to go through a, menial task type of a job, right? And if you can't get that right, how are you going to get the complex stuff right later on?
You can always tell. So if you have an irate customer or something like that, you can always tell, this person's never worked in the service industry. I think everyone should have to, just by default, you build so much character. I mean, you really just learn to treat other people the way you want to be treated. Because, I worked consumer. I mean, one of my first jobs was concession stand manager over a Cinemark way back in the day. And you got some irate customers. You got to learn how you facilitate their needs, how do you acknowledge their issue. I mean, it's one of those things where it kind of spreads across every industry. Those skill sets you build. Yeah. So I remember I say that Cinemark because I remember. Do you remember having to clean those old soda machines where you got to unscrew that, pop it out, sanitize it?
Yep, and the shake machine.
Yeah.
So and we had a frozen lemonade machine also.
Oh God, those are terrible to clean.
But once you get into the kitchen, then what's the worst thing that you have to clean is that's going to be the grill.
Yeah.
Right. So when you got to get into the grill, it's like, oh, that's a whole different story. But that is another set of skills that you take with you on cleaning your own kitchen at some point, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, so if you were to take pride in the way that your stuff, is kept up, right? You look at the restaurant industry as a standard, right? I mean, they have to clean everything to a certain standard every single day, right?
Oh yeah, either the health company or the health department will shut them down, or I mean, if you have really stringent standards, sometimes if you're a franchisee, the parent company, they'll actually come in and they'll shut you down.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a whole nother situation.
And then did you also go to the school, it looks like, for IT as well?
I did, yep. So I went to SMU, Southern Methodist University here in Dallas, and specifically for IT, and spent a lot of time during that, trying to figure out kind of where I wanted to go specifically within IT, and ultimately kind of landed into cybersecurity as a result of some networking people that I knew and whatnot. So I had gotten into a gig working with Microsoft. And so I'd been at Microsoft for about a year, and I get a call from, and I was doing support at Microsoft too.
Oh gosh.
But on the security product side, right? And I got a call, remember it very, very vividly, from a recruiter from a company called Internet Security Systems that would go on to be bought by IBM. But this was back in 2000, right? So they recruited me in, relocated me to Atlanta.
Oh, really?
And I literally, for the first time ever, worked at a solely cybersecurity company, right? That was arguably, between them and a couple of other vendors, were the grandfathers of cybersecurity, right? So ISS started out with their scanning software, right?
Really?
And host-based intrusion detection, as well as their network and internet scanners, which were early day vulnerability scanners, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah. So then, they were first in the business, I believe, of putting their software on appliance, and that appliance would be a Nokia appliance.
Oh, really?
Yep. So they partnered with Nokia way early on.
What kind of appliances were they?
They were IDS appliances. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So once they got into that business, of course, everything changed because, it was no longer like, well, we got to go through all of this nonsense of installing software. Like, no, we can ship you a box, it's ready to go.
Yep.
Plug it in, and you're off to the races, right? So learned a whole bunch there. I actually was there whenever 9/11 happened. I was in the SOC watching it on the big screens at that time. So that's my vivid memory of that moment and, being in that place. And then not too long after that, a lot of companies started having significant financial issues, right? The dot-com bubble was bursting and all that. So I got caught up in a layoff with those guys and ultimately ended up coming back to Dallas and got a gig with a company called Citadel Security Software that would go on to be acquired by McAfee.
Oh, there you go. The OG.
The OG, right? Yeah, exactly. So then whenever that occurred, so I got in there as like, SE number one at Citadel and was essentially reporting to the CTO, super small company, right? I mean, it was
cool.
Startup on a budget kind of thing. But what was neat about it was we were actually taking the data from the vulnerability scanning tools like ISS's Real Secure Scanner and then assigning remediation tactics to those scan objects, right? So you get a scan, it says this system needs remediation, delete a registry key, right? We could actually go in with an agent on box and delete that registry. It was the first sign of remediation in the industry.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So the company grew, et cetera. And ultimately what went on was things kind of slowed down, right? And it seemed like there was different pastures getting greener in the industry. And so a couple of my buddies ended up jumping into gigs over at Symantec. So I followed them. And literally a few months after I left, then Citadel would go on to be acquired by McAfee. So it was
escapes a good time.
It could be looked at as that way, or it could be looked at as like, man, you missed the McAfee boat because almost everybody got to work at McAfee with me.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, I say that kind of as a joke because then I would go on to work at FireEye, right, which ultimately would be split apart and go to be combined with another big company called McAfee to make up Trellix, right? So ultimately, I did end up working with a lot of those people, but I wasn't
indirectly
OG.
Different path.
Yeah, different path, exactly.
What was it like working at Symantec? Was that when they were at the peak? Because remember, back in the day, I mean, everyone talks about Sentinel-1, CrowdStrike, Microsoft. Now, like back in the day, Symantec used to be really well respected, although I would joke it's just a virus for college laptops because like it's default on so many laptops, but I would partially jest.
So the environment was different back then, right? So one of the things I remember that was really cool is I had been there for maybe 6 months or so, and they started acquiring companies like crazy. And that was new to me. I was still, kind of young in the business, didn't understand why go buy somebody else's business.
Yeah.
Like, what's the value of doing that? Especially if you're buying a business that has a widget that is really similar to a widget that you already have, right? But when you look at that from a, really 50,000 foot, 100,000 foot view of it, and you're thinking in a 10, 15, 20 year picture, these guys were doing the right thing, right? They knew it was going to be cheaper to acquire than it was to build, right?
Yep.
Doesn't mean it's better, but it means that you get to maybe you're closer to the finish line, right? You're starting closer.
It's a lot quicker too.
It's certainly quicker and arguably maybe less expensive, but who knows, right? Because what I think a lot of businesses experienced at that time that started going through this M&A craze was that the stuff that they were buying wasn't all that it cracked up to be, right? In a lot of cases. So you're buying some stuff that like maybe, one out of the three things is a really awesome tech, but the others are kind of struggling. Okay, well, to go sell all three of them, how do I do that? These other, they're substandard, right? So that kind of thing. So then what I remember also was dealing with early days of integrations, right? Of integrating software tools together when SIM was in its youth, right?
Right.
And so Symantec had a SIM. They had acquired another company.
And just for my parents at home, what's a SIM for folks that
So like a security information event management tool, right? So think about that as kind of like, the large dashboard where all of your data, the conduit coming in, and it's a visualization of everything going on in your org, right? That's the hope, right? If everything is working as designed. So we were at Symantec early days of that, bought a company that was doing that, and then it was a hodgepodge of how to figure out, get it to work, right? Plug all these things in, let's get event sources, and it's complicated. I mean, nowadays it's not near as complicated as it was back then, because a ton of it goes on in the cloud, right?
Also, I would also debate it's also the architecture. Like nowadays, your product has to be playing well with others in order to be part of any ecosystem.
Right.
Very few companies are all in on a single manufacturer. I think that's another big thing. I think that's another really big thing we've seen change the IT past couple of decades, really too.
I would agree with that. So in the early days, you were really paying for the tech itself and not really thinking about this whole concept of storage and everything, because it was you hadn't dealt with the storage problem yet.
Yeah.
Right. It hadn't gotten big enough yet.
Oh yeah.
And so when that started to spool up, and folks realized, my gosh, it's going to cost us more in storage than this solution is, right? And now we've got to go a whole nother budget and everything else. So it made that more complex. But what Symantec did well was they acquired a lot of companies that had working solutions that were pretty good. They were early in the industry, and they were pliable, right?
Yeah.
So they could be shaped as necessary in a lot of ways. And so that made them different, right? They were one of the only that was doing that, spending money like crazy. John Thompson was the CEO at the time. He's an amazing person. Really had the sales org had been, completely revamped, and they had just some really, really good people. I remember, I made friends literally friends for life since I've been there. And have at other companies too, but that was like an early stage kind of deal. Did a lot of traveling, got to do some pretty neat international projects that had a lot of international travel for 1 year, early product stuff where you're getting to experience things before anyone else will, right? And then, working with steering committees to, help decide whether or not something should make it, or, hey, is that tied to a customer need? If it's not, we're building something for nobody.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, hey, that sounds great. You want to build that, but should we spend 6 months doing that kind of thing?
Yeah. It's always that funny disconnect. Someone in the company be like, this is a great idea. Yeah, but the customers have no need for it, and they are not asking for it.
Yep.
So more often than not, that usually doesn't pan out.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And then if you're in sales like we are, right, we look at that and we go, how much is it going to cost to build this thing?
Yeah.
How much are we going to sell it for? How long is it going to take to pay for itself?
Yeah.
And how much am I going to get paid when I sell it?
Yeah.
Right. Is it going to be something I'm going to, make my number with, right? Or
Absolutely.
Or is it going to create, like a lot of the technologies that we've seen now, and some of that started in those like mid 2000s of creating these really lengthy sales cycles, right? Where you have, 6 to 12 to 18 month sales cycles that you're doing, just crazy amounts of work, customizations and stuff to make things happen. But ultimately on the other end of it, you're getting a, $5 million deal out of it, or, an ELA or multi-year contract that, that you did the right thing, right? And that the customer got the best bang for the buck for them, right? I remember doing a lot of that in the early days of, where organizations would say, okay, well, how much would it be if we bought all of your technology, right?
Yeah.
And so the ELA thing starts coming in, and you're thinking about, okay, well, we can still make money if we sell it to them for $5 million, right? And they could do that. They could use as much as they want for 3 years straight. Well, how do you measure that though, right?
Yeah.
It's tough to do that.
That's another funny disconnect when you talk to like relatives like are in IT. Like a lot of people think of sales cycle in IT like, well, let's go. Well, I was going to say we'll go to a Best Buy. No one does that anymore. But realistically, let's say when I buy like malware bytes or something, well, you just go to the website, you buy it for $20-$30, it installs in seconds. That sales cycle, even if you did a research, maybe you look for a day or two.
Yep.
Now that's business to consumer. That's pretty quick. But when we're you and I we're doing business to business, so we're helping companies with their cybersecurity. You're right. It's 6, 12, sometimes 18-month sales cycle.
Yeah.
And depending on technology, then you got where what's the steps for the install? How long might that take? thankfully, IT's gotten a lot better at expediting that process.
Sure.
But yeah, that's another variable a lot of people forget about, and really is going to bring value to the customers. And the worst thing possibly, which is I'm a big fan of doing POCs first, or POVs, proof of value, because that's a fancy acronym. But it's like we'll really integrate to the customer's ecosystem, the customer's environment, and really work well. Like the worst thing in the planet is shelfware. That's the worst thing to do to a customer. Which, if you're not in IT, that's, well, I guess nowadays it's not physically hard software on a disk, but like it used to be you buy something and they just put it on a shelf. They never actually implement it into their environment, so it'd be waste of money.
Yeah. Right.
Like nowadays, you just don't turn it on. There's no physical CDs.
So it's that, but then I would argue that none of us want to have a customer that comes up on their renewal at let's say month 10 of a 1 year, and they get their bill and they're like, "What do we use this for?"
Yeah.
Right. They don't actually know what they bought, or maybe the person that bought it is gone. Right. But still, it's like, hey, here's the reminder, you're getting your renewal. Right. And they're like, oh my gosh, I don't think we budgeted, or, whatever the case is. So then we're going back in and we're selling again. Right.
Restart.
And some of us don't get paid on renewals.
That's
right?
true.
So it comes back to how it's originally sold, right? And being able to pick up the track again and say, hey, the reason why your org bought this is XYZ. Right. And we know based on you're an MSP customer with us today, so we can see your dashboard and it's working really good. And we'll give you a bunch of executive reports so that you can figure this. Right. So go, hopefully be able to justify the budget spend if it wasn't there. But, that's another thing, is being in the right vendor space nowadays, right? So,
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot of vendors that were really hot 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And they're not so hot now, right?
I mean, it used to be, can't go 2 seconds without someone naming Synergy or Cloud. Like, it's anything they talk about, or hyperconverged, which...
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays, there's still things, don't get me wrong, but the cycle's moved on. He's got different topics.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks to VMware, now Nutanix is hot again, but...
Right, yeah. I think it comes down to we have to be flexible as the manufacturer to the customer needs, right? So, I mean, I've met with, over the last probably 3 months, some of the largest organizations in the world, right? And they have a very key presence, and they say very similar things, which means their leadership is saying the same things, right? So they're looking at things, they're strategic about the clouds that they use, right? So there are companies that are using multi-cloud approach, right? But the guys that are really doing IT well know exactly how much it costs to have their stuff over in this cloud versus this cloud, and which one of those providers is treating them well.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And because that shifts too. So, look at these big companies. I mean, they're spending exorbitant amounts of money just on the cloud. Oh, yeah. Literally, not even on the security services to protect said cloud.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Or clouds.
That's your responsibility. It's funny, though, like I've worked with some small companies where there's this inherent trust that people have with Amazon.com, because they do have some of the best customer service I've seen in e-commerce, bar none. But they think, oh, yeah, we'll just go throw it up in AWS. I'm like, yeah, I can do that. It's an easy credit card swipe. But how are you going to secure it? They're like, well, what do you mean? Like, well, when I buy something on Amazon.com, when I'm buying, some groceries or something, they protect my credit card. I'm like, yeah, that's because, it's their money, their platform and everything. But that's, your little virtual space in the cloud. It's up to us. We need to secure that, virtual firewall, something like that. Like, so I think that was smart companies are learning more and more, thankfully, partially education. But a lot of people think they have the idea that the cloud is secure. It's like, it is for, like, Amazon, their data is safe. Yeah, that's fine. But your data, and this is any cloud manufacturer, it's your responsibility and the responsibility of your partner. You need to secure your instance in the cloud.
Sure.
So it's one of those things where, like, you're moving the problem. Like, there's no data center in your headquarters anymore, sure, but now it's just a different thing you have to take care of. Like, I don't really think, like, there's a debate of, do you save money or decrease workloads or, employee input and management. I kind of think it's about the same at the end of the day when you look at the bills and how much input you have to do. It's just different types of spending.
It is different types of spending, and the folks that you're working with or people that you're hiring are different types of people than, say, what I am from back in the day, right? If you're doing a lot of really bleeding edge tech in the cloud today, you're hiring somebody that is fluent in cloud. You don't really care about the guy that knows a whole bunch about on-prem and all that kind of thing, right? It's like, so you're looking for the certifications for the guy AWS and Azure and whatnot. So it is different, right? And the vendor space on the manufacturer side has a little bit of a bipolar going on there, right? Especially if you're offering on-prem as well as SaaS offerings, right? So you're like, okay, well, we've got this kind of dinosaur offering, and then we've got like today's offering.
But the thing is, the customer's always right. So we can't, I could say a giant oil company, they like an email security solution, but there's stipulation it has to be on-prem on a physical device.
Yeah.
It's like one of the biggest email security solutions is they do that because a big enough customer said, if you are a business, you shall make it so.
Right.
And it's all about, every customer is different, unique, and there's a use case for everything. It's just, can the manufacturer justify the ROI and make it so it's beneficial for everyone involved? So that's the thing they need to take into account. It's like, well, some manufacturers are only having their stuff in one cloud, but what if the customer doesn't like that? So there's so many nuances to the cloud. It's not just one thing. There's so many variables, and nowadays there's so many offerings for the cloud. You have the big three, don't get me wrong, but there are startups every day in that space as well, too.
Yeah. So you have that, and then you've also, like you mentioned, the ecosystem aspect of it. So you've got the legacy ecosystem that now has to play with the current and future ecosystem, right? Because you've got legacy tech that's still very much in play. So let's just say like old school kind of endpoints and things of that nature. It's never going to go away, right? Because it's DLP technology or it's whatever the case is. But once that whole thing starts to converge, right? You've got the old and the new coming together. They have to play with each other, and they've got to be able to do that in an expedient way, right? So it's no more of the, I'm sorry it doesn't work with that, right? I mean, that's not an excuse anymore, right? So what we're seeing more is that, code is getting completely thrown out, revamped, and in a lot of cases, it's like, hey, we're going to keep this versioning here for these customers that want to stay there, right? And you're just going to pay for support for that. But you're not going to upgrade because you're not going to be able to qualify into the next level, right? The old operating systems or whatever the case is. So we're still seeing a lot of stuff like that. And then I would say in POVs where there's more like, hey, we use this endpoint and this endpoint. We got like 3 or 4. And, for our Mac deployment, we're not using the leading provider to do deployment. We're using the second or third tier. Can you work with that? Well, we don't normally, but guess what? Now we have to.
Yeah, we will now.
Yeah, so you're kind of getting downgraded in some of those cases. You have to, work with some of the non-major players, but to that point, you want the business, right? And also to be able to show the flexibility of your tooling, right? So if you've got a solution that is very flexible and your competitor is not, well, of course, I'm going to shine that light all day long.
Exactly.
But it'll come right back to me as well in some cases, right? Depending on where you sit in line with certain technologies and the network and whatnot. There's old school ways that are never going to go away, right?
Oh, very true. Especially manufacturing, we got those multi-million-dollar machines, and they're still running Windows 7 or XP. It's like, well, those multi-million-dollar heavy machines don't get they don't have a life cycle like a laptop where every 2 years maybe get a new laptop.
Right.
It's like, no, that company's not going to move that machine for probably a couple decades.
Yeah. You don't want to touch that.
No, it's working. Don't touch it.
That's exactly right. Yep.
And then what's it like working with some of the largest companies on the planet? Because like you said, there's so many variables. And like, what is it like? Because just for the sales cycle, with the politics, all the people, because there's so many people you have to work with together across departments, maybe across the globe.
Yeah.
What's that like? I know for some folks, I'm sure it's overwhelming, but when you've successfully done that for several years, it's one of the most difficult things to do in business and cybersecurity, especially.
Yeah. Well, you're right. So being in the business, it's not just about showing up and selling something, right? Because you might get to show up and sell something one time, but you're not really successful in that endeavor and you don't get to come back, right? So one of the things that you got to be good at is you got to be able to build the trust with the customer and be able to have that opportunity to come back in the door, right? Which means you got to do right by your customer, right? Make sure that they're happy at every single step of the way in that pre-sales buying cycle, all the way up until the day that services says, okay, we're done. It's yours now, right? So in working with the big guys, what I've seen is that they treat IT as a real business, right? It's not just, hey, we're doing IT as a service. Okay, well, show me some of the reports that you guys give to management that show how much this costs and that costs and whatever. They can't do that, right? You're not doing IT as a service.
Yeah.
Big guys, they are, and they have been for a very long time, right? They bill the business back for their services, right? And that's how they cover their bottom line. The thing that I would show in most recent cases is just the adoption of new technologies with the bigger heavy hitters out there. They're not scared to go buy multi-vendored approach, right? So, I mean, if there's 3 vendors that they need to acquire to be able to fill that gap, and that they're confident that they can manage those, they'll buy them, right? Because that need is there, rather than sit back and say, well, we're going to wait till this one gets a little bit more mature. If it fits their use case and it's usable in their environment, they will acquire it, right? And then, it's on the vendor to be able to, keep up with the pace of that customer. And I mean, one in particular that I met with recently, I mean, they have a development staff in their cybersecurity org,
which is
right.
So
this
rare.
is like dozens of developers.
You don't see that in small to medium business or mid market.
Not at all.
You never see that.
Yeah, and so the neat thing is they have the ability to do things that vendors can't do, right? I mean, they have homegrown a ton of technology. So in a lot of cases, they say, you need to link into our system. Okay, well, how do we need to talk there? Okay, well, there's RESTful APIs or whatever the case is. Once you're connected there, then we'll be able to do our true testing. It's like, okay, all right, so then get us connected and go through that process. They also have a incredible capability on automation in their environments, right? They have taken up the automation flag and run with it in the big businesses, right? They understand that without doing that, they can't survive, because especially with these big things that occur in some cases where you get an update that comes down from a vendor that crashes a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? You need to have how do you back that out? How do you remediate? Well, I mean, we found out pretty quickly that a lot of very big businesses did not have any ability to do that, right? They couldn't back it out.
That's a big wake-up call for a lot of those companies.
A lot of wake-up calls happened, and at the same time, it shined the light on other weaknesses in the organization too, unfortunately, right? It's like, hey, well, so the guys that are doing deployment, how do we just fix all this stuff really quickly? Can't you just pop an image back down there and they're back online? Well, no, not so much.
Not this case, no.
Right, not here, yeah. So like, hey, the laptop's bricked, or, whatever the case is. But I think the bigger companies have a better grasp on doing that kind of stuff. It's certainly in mass, like with this particular group, these guys have people that do, they're dedicated to this operating system and this operating system and so on. And so that all they handle is just deployment, right? And you give them the package, they tune it, they deploy it, and then they're done, right?
Yeah.
And then it starts a whole nother track of people that manage it, right? The people that manage the endpoint. So you have 5, 6, 7 teams that you're interfacing with at this stage of the game with the big businesses, right? Where with, some of the smaller, it's like a quarter of that, an eighth of that, right? So that's a big thing. And then the others is just their sheer ability to break things, right? Big business has the ability to break pretty much anything, and they know it. That's the other thing that's cool, is they'll say, hey, look, what's the biggest database that you guys have in your customer portfolio? And they're like, oh, it's like whatever terabytes, 500 terabytes. They're like, oh, okay, great. So what would happen if we scanned a 1 terabyte file? And I mean, that's a real question.
Out, yeah.
Well, it's not a find out. It's, do you have a 1 terabyte file?
Yeah.
We're like, yeah, we can make those, right? We're like, holy cow, what happened? And so that's part of their testing process and criteria, because in this particular case, they actually have a real world use case for that particular type of scan, because guess what? They have a system that ever so often pops out these gigantic reports that are Excel files that are read by a whole nother proprietary system. We have to be able to scan that file to look for any type of presence of, certain content that they don't want to be in those files, right? So you get down that rabbit hole. You don't see that very often with the other guys.
I was going to say, what's it like? Kind of, do you get to bridge the gap between the manufacturing engineers that you work with and the end user customer? Because I'm guessing some of these companies are so big, they could demand special, and they might even need, like you're saying, special customization, special integrations.
Oh yeah,
that's got to be pretty exciting.
So it's exciting for one thing. It's big learning experience, right? Because essentially, you look at the perspective of the customer when they're that size, they have a really good grasp on what it takes to get something done, right, in their environment. So when you say, okay, well, our services team can get this deployed for you in 3 months, and they say, there is nothing that happens here in 3 months, right? This is a 1 year minimum okay, great. That's good for us to know. So we have to dedicate or give, fractional ownership of a resource for a year to get that done, right? That's something that you don't take into consideration with others.
Very true.
But then, the other thing that is neat is, in this particular instance, they're a business that you would see all the time, right? And so, you go into that business and you consume from them, and you're like, well, I'm consuming from you, you're going to consume from me, right? But I'm confident that, whenever I swipe my card or I do something with this organization, that they do have their customers' data in mind, right? I mean, that's like one of the most important things to them if you ask them that. And a lot of them can also tell you very quickly how much money it costs them if there's a hiccup, right? Like, hey, we'll just let you know that, if your endpoint causes an issue in our, Mac environment of, let's say, 50,000 endpoints, that's going to be like $1 million a minute or, whatever. So like, we don't have any forgiveness for outages in that case. I'm like, okay, good to know, right?
They pretty much say this won't happen.
They say this won't happen. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Exactly.
That's a great and fascinating thing about IT. It can be such a great thing, and it does, propel businesses, make them stronger. And also, but if there's an issue, downtime can cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. It adds up in the aggregate like no other, especially the big companies.
Yeah. So it's that, and then the emotional impact, right, to the customer and then to the business, right? So in the case that we're probably thinking about, right, where there was, some of these big businesses that literally had outages that affected millions of people, and those millions of people were trying to get transported places, right? So like that literally stopped business for hundreds of thousands of consumers, right? Like,
out of curiosity, do you think Delta will win that? You could say the names. Do you think Delta will win that lawsuit against CrowdStrike?
I think they will.
Really?
Yeah, I think they will, but I just don't know how. I mean, so when you think about a license agreement, right, and all the things that we, as consumers and as IT businesses and stuff, they write all that, you think that there's got to be like no way to get in there, right? It's like it should be ironclad. Yeah. But I think in this case, you're going to have two juggernauts going against each other, and maybe they come to some kind of agreement. That's what I could see. It's like, hey, we're just not going to say that either of us are the bad guys here, but we did come to a settlement agreement, right? And wink, wink.
That's the majority of lawsuits. They're never even going to court. It's just going to be settled because, again, it's going to take time, money, energy, resources, and it'll make them both look bad.
Right. So and the only people that win is the lawyers.
That's a good industry to be in. They always win every situation, it seems.
Yep.
But yeah, that's the thing where like that CrowdStrike outage reportedly cost Fortune 500 companies like, was it $450 to $500 million in downtime?
Yeah, it was like $500 million. Yep.
Oh, it's astronomical, and I don't know. I'm pretty skeptical. I don't know if there'll actually be a payout because if there is, then the cybersecurity insurance for
it would open the door for
the domino effect the domino effect, the ripple effect, it'd be so detrimental because think about it, the IT manufacturers would have to ramp up their insurance policies to something astronomical.
Yep.
Because there's always going to be variables you can't account for, no matter how. And everyone's human. There's always some curveball people don't see coming, and people make honest mistakes as well. And just the liability, I don't know how the industry could support it. I think that would eviscerate most of the profits that are left. And most, as we know, like a lot of cybersecurity companies take years to make a profit. Like CrowdStrike just made a fiscal profit like last fiscal quarter, I think.
Yeah.
Like most of them bleed money for years before they actually get to that moment. We'll see. I think you're right. They'll probably settle for some undisclosed amount outside of court.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the modern Y2K. Or Y2K didn't happen, but that sure as heck did.
Right. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. So, I think that when we look at the consumer element of that, the consumer is affected with enterprise software, right? And it's like, hey, it's not a big deal. This is just business to business. Like, no, well, the consumer is in so many places now, right? Unless your business is truly like you're in the
government contracting.
Yeah, right.
Like, you got one customer, it's the government. Like, pretty much every business eventually touches the end user in some way.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. So that's the point I was trying to drive home. But so I think that what we're going to see is more opportunity there for the consumer to potentially get rewarded in those cases, right? Because think about it, if there was consumers that could prove that outage caused hey, the wife couldn't get to the hospital because of something like that. The consumer would win. Yeah. Right. They really would. But the business, it'll be interesting. Yeah.
was gonna say I'm not putting any money on it. We'll see.
No, yeah, and I wouldn't either. But yeah, it's good topic for conversation.
Right?
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, good use case in terms of how to respond and how to get back online. I mean, because thankfully, most companies with, good partners, everything, they're back online pretty quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, even just for a big company, just a couple, like you were saying earlier, just a couple of minutes of downtime can mean hundreds of millions of dollars. It's insane.
Yeah. And the volume. Right.
Oh, yeah,
So, I mean, if you're looking at the amount of endpoints that was affected by companies, I mean, in some cases it could be, it was like, 1%.
Oh, yeah.
Or it could be 75%. Mm-hmm. And if you've got 75% of your organization is down, mm-hmm. I mean, there are a whole bunch of laptops of people that are like, field sailors or whatever the case is. Well, your revenue generation clock in part is pretty much stopped.
Exactly.
Right. So how do you get that back up and running? Well, you got to fix all this stuff, but you got to pretty much be able to prove without a shadow of a doubt that every minute that your org is down, it's costing this much money. And surprise, there's a lot of businesses that can do that nowadays, right?
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, if the whole team was up, the team and I were up at like 1 a.m. or 1:30 a.m. that day. Yeah, it was a long, little while, but yeah.
Definitely was. Absolutely.
Then speaking of insurance, tell us a little about Chapman Group.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a little bit of a background in the insurance space from my family's history in doing life and health insurance as a brokerage firm. So the business has been in business for about 44 years now.
Oh, congrats. That's awesome.
And I am only 47 years old. I did not start it in 3 years. It was started by my family. But we've got over 1,000 customers. I've been in Dallas for the entire time, and we've got customers that are all over the state, right? And everything that I've set up until this point, based on my working in manufacturing and customer service and everything like that, translates into the mom and pop business that the Chapman Group is, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we have over the years had tons and tons of businesses come in that are small businesses that need help with their insurance, right? And I mean. It was a lot more difficult before the internet, mm-hmm. right? And then the internet came, and then they applied a whole bunch of crazy laws to healthcare, and then it got even harder, right, for the consumer. So, when we work for a big organization where we get our benefits, that are through a group health coverage, mm-hmm. it's a completely different model than it is for the consumer, right?
Oh yeah.
So the cost of my insurance with my current job that I work at, if I was paying that on my own for, say, a family, would be like $2,200 a month.
That's insane.
Right? Yeah, but with the company assistance, obviously, it's a lot less. So I think I pay like $600 a month.
Which compared to $2,200, it's a pretty good deal.
Big deal, right?
And then as a brokerage firm, you go out and help them find insurance.
Right. So
kind of like a value-added reseller for insurance.
Correct. So the Chapman Group represents all of the major players out there. Like,
is it very similar to IT where you have to be authorized with them, or how does that work?
It is exactly like that. So the one major caveat is within IT. Obviously, you don't have to have a license that you carry with you that makes you responsible for things outside of your business license, right?
True.
So then in IT, we have certifications and things like that. That's where we build our brand and our skill. Mm-hmm. So within the insurance space, you're building based on how many agents you have working for you, right? And then how many of the providers that you can service and do business with, right? So obviously you want to go for the big ones, right? So we've been in business so long that we've got a relationship with all of them, right?
Nice.
So we can sell any of them, but as we see today, I mean, the theme really is with the bigger ones, right? So, you see a lot of, certainly in Texas, you got Blue Cross Blue Shield and the United Health Group, right? And then there's, obviously smaller ones, but then there's all these kind of ancillary products outside of that too, that you get into, like, life insurance, right? And I mean, everybody should have some understanding of how life insurance works, right? It's a great vehicle for investment. Right. And in a lot of cases, people look at it like, it's an archaic way of doing that. But if you understand how that vehicle can work, right, where you can pay into it, and then, gaining value along the way, you can cash out money out of it in some cases, right?
I don't think I think very few people realize that. They think of the old definition of life insurance where, yes, you pay in, but it only pays out if you pass away.
Right, which is just a term policy, right? And
Precisely.
and that's the cheapest. So many people are conditioned to just buy the $1 million term policy, pay, 20 years goes by, you didn't die. Well, hey, great, you're still here.
Yep.
That's good, but unfortunately all that money is down the drain.
Yeah. And then, so what are the two types so that term is when you die or when you pass away.
Right.
And then what's the other definition called?
Well, no. So within, you're talking about the two different types of life insurance. So you got term, which is what we just discussed, and then you've got like universal whole life, which is where that's actually an investment vehicle, right? So they're actually investing that money that you're putting in, and so it will go up in value and actually have value throughout that time, right? So let's say it's a 20-year policy. At 19 years, I mean, you can go look at it and see like, wow, after 19 years, I've paid, $100,000 into this thing and it's $1 million policy. I want my money out. Okay, well, you can go take a loan against that money if you want to take, I mean, it's tangible. Right, versus the term isn't, and they're not interchangeable in a lot of ways. Like many people look at it from the perspective of, hey, I want one that's going to be cheap, that's for right now, and one that's an investment vehicle. So I'm going to do both.
Really?
Right?
Makes sense. All right.
So like a term policy could be like $30 a month. Right, for $1 million life insurance policy, you put your beneficiary on there, you put it on auto draft, and you don't think about it. And like, hey, if something happens to me, I get hit by a bus, somebody's going to get $1 million.
Yeah.
Right. And however that works out in your mind, some people are like, I don't care, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'd rather put my money in the market or in Bitcoin or whoever. Right, doesn't matter. But it's different. So our job is to obviously advise the consumers that come to us. We've got small businesses that they'll come in and get a group policy, and then they add those ancillary things to them, like AD&D, accidental death and dismemberment, long-term care, or life insurance. Obviously, there's other ways that they can enrich their portfolio to their employees, right? So, because employees might come along and say, like, hey, I know my wife is. We're thinking about having a baby or whatever, right? And I want to go to a place that's going to cover that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because that's an expensive thing to take on.
I didn't realize how expensive it was until my friends started having kids. Like, oh yeah, without insurance, it would have been $40,000. Like $40,000.
And that's cheap. Like, I mean, I've heard more. Yeah.
You've heard more?
I've heard more, right? Yeah, exactly. So then think about it in terms of, well, hey, I'm about to, take on a new employer here. I mean, you're going to get strategic pretty quickly in that way.
Yeah.
But then in others, like the way that they will, do their 401k matching or whatever, the small businesses, it's a whole different type of strategy. So we're primarily on that life and health side. We've done some stuff on the P&C side as well, property and casualty. And that's a whole different beast in and of itself, right? Because that's talking about your home and your auto and, umbrella policy and things like that. And that's kind of like a race to the bottom, right? So we've seen so much of that industry just get crushed by all of the natural disasters that have gone on. And then, just like certainly us living here in Dallas, we've got, traffic has gone significantly worse, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Dallas is now rated one of the worst places for like rush hour, all this, like what you never thought, like, Houston maybe,
sure,
but no, Dallas, no. So it's that bad, right? It really is. So, you start thinking strategically in terms of, where you're going to put your money for, the different insurance companies that you do business with, right? And that's a whole nother topic of conversation of the future of insurance and how we're going to see more of that consolidation continue to happen as we have, right? So, there's some of these providers have gone to other states and said, we're not going to cover homes in, Florida or California or whatever.
Most of them pulled out of California, Florida. I think especially, wasn't the big
fires.
one State Farm?
State Farm was the big one, yeah.
They said they would not cover any new policies, I think, California.
Right, no more new ones. Which means they're going to jack up all the other ones, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, those policies are going to be insane. I'm actually surprised, how little home insurance is, because I think mine's like $13 a month for my rental. Like it's relatively nothing to the value of the home. I'm sure my landlord's happy, but yeah, it's one of those things where race to the bottom. I'm surprised anyone's in business selling that. pretty sure maybe that's why they have to sell multiple line items.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a loss leader because they also do my car or something like that.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
car insurance. My car insurance nearly doubled going from Iowa to Texas.
Yeah.
Also makes sense. I drive down the road and see a lot of Porsches, McLarens, and Aston Martins. I'm like, oh, okay, I can kind of understand why.
And then you drive around the Metroplex and see how it's under construction, and then you join some of the Instagram groups that post Dallas traffic all the time, and you're like, now I realize why it's so bad, right? I mean, it's just crazy. And having driven in places where the traffic is really bad, like L.A. and San Francisco and places like that, whereas I mean, you're sitting for hours, trying to get to your destination, and that's how it is here now, right? So the insurance industry, they know those things very, very well. They also know they can't predict the weather, obviously, but they can look at the numbers, right, and know that hey, well, Texas has already had enough of these, big out of nowhere hailstorms that have cost us millions in roofs and cars and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I knew friends from this last one that happened where they had 3 cars get totaled.
I believe
from the hail. Then they don't live far from you up here, and it was like, oh my gosh! I mean, brand new, like $100,000 cars, whoop, totaled. Like, how can insurance do that? Like, it's not sustainable to do that kind of thing. And so, the consumer, we're driving that initiative too. Like, I mean, how much will you pay for your auto insurance to have a guarantee that if something happens, you get your vehicle replaced, like with a brand new, or whatever all the different little marketing spiels that they have to get us to use them as a manufacturer vendor, right?
Exactly. So do you cover employee policies for like an employee vehicle, or also their home auto policy as well, or both?
So on the PNC side of things, that's outside of the scope of the small medium business. So that would just be B2C, not B2B.
Business to consumer.
Correct. Right. Exactly.
So you guys are primarily business to business, right?
Primarily, no. So on the life and health side, we do both B2C, B2B.
Okay.
But on the PNC side, it's just B2C because there's a whole nother industry of like the big folks that do P&C for big businesses and whatnot. So, and it's depending on what the business is. Like one of the customers that you and I talked about that's a big landscape company up here, right? Obviously they have a completely different type of policy on their bulldozers and bobcats and 2-ton trucks that guys are driving around with a gooseneck trailer versus the secretary that drives a Kia.
Yeah,
right. Whole different deal, right?
Oh, I can't imagine insurance policies on commercial vehicles. Like people don't realize, the bulldozers is as expensive as a home. It's like that commercial equipment is so expensive. I mean, it makes sense, the quality, and again, there's more parts and components in there and make it expensive, and those will last decades. But there's a reason there's a price associated with the insurance policies as well. I can't imagine that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a whole nother world, right? You start talking about insurance, and of course, we can all go on a diatribe about our disdain for the insurance businesses because everybody feels like they've been screwed at least once by insurance. Like they didn't pay out enough or whatever. Like they denied my claim. But I mean, now we look at it as, I mean, I certainly do with kind of from both parties' perspective of how in the world do they survive? I mean, it's like the payouts for these big hurricanes and stuff. Are, I mean, billions and billions of dollars. Where do you have that money? I mean, how does that? It doesn't seem like it's a scalable way for them to do business.
And I forgot, do most of them have underwriting or like insurance for insurance?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got reinsurance on top of that.
And then is there insurance for the insurance?
So, I mean,
where does it end?
So you think about like, the creative side of that, which is like the reinsurance, like Lloyd's of London and, people that are like, hey, I need you to insure my priceless Bugatti that's going to be moving in a shipping container from here to here, and I need it to be covered from this port to this port. Well, how much is that? The car's $5 million. What would happen if that ship sank? Do you want $5 million? No, I want more than that because I can't get another one. Right? And so there's a lot of specialties.
That's almost it. When you get into those type of supercars, you're almost in the same realm as trying to insure priceless works of art. Because depending on the manufacturer, Ferrari will make it 100 times if it's an F40. Like there's jokes on how many SKUs or how many, they said they limited to 500. Like they've counted a lot more than that. But most companies, once they make a product, that's it. It's like a fine work of art. Like Porsche's not going to make any more Carrera GTs. partially because of regulation, but
Yeah.
and emissions, all that crap.
Yeah.
But like you can't replace those.
Yeah.
It's a finite work of art.
Well, the thing that we've seen on top of that, right, is that there's been more specialty from, say, like the manufacturers in that regard, from Porsche or from Tesla, right?
yeah.
Tesla has their own insurance, rightfully so, because now
Smart.
we're finding out that, hey, it's a whole different animal when an electric vehicle gets into an accident, right?
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully it doesn't catch on fire, because then it's even bigger deal.
Then
right?
then they let it burn.
Right. And, well, because
so
they can't.
Oh, yeah,
Can't,
most
there's
fire-
not enough water to put it out,
Well,
right?
well, not just that.
Or the foam.
Well, at least these days, a majority of fire departments still don't have the appropriate suppression technology for lithium-ion fires.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
like you're
that's
saying, oh, yeah,
portable.
they need the special foam for it.
Yeah.
And the adoption rate is increasing in terms of fire departments having that, but
Yeah.
it's still more of a niche
Yeah.
have right now.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
for
yeah,
sure.
that's why no track will let you. Most tracks in Texas don't let you have an EV on the track.
No.
Because they'll tell you like we don't have the insurance for this and we don't have the fire suppression technology.
Yeah.
And the ones that will say, okay, well you track it, but you realize if it's on fire, the whole day shut down. We don't try to for safety. We just let it burn. We don't put anyone near it.
Yeah.
Because insurance and all that words and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's a whole nother thing. But where I think we're going to see more of this that's going to go on is this specialties in insurance, right? So people,
Oh, yeah.
you're on the EV side, or I mean, I'm surprised that we haven't seen it more on like on the truck side, like big trucks. Like, hey, if you drive a big, whatever over 1 ton vehicle, but it's consumer, right? Then you might want a different type of policy versus, or you got somebody that drives something that's really fast or expensive. So you've got these other ancillary products and companies that cover stuff like that, right? And so you can get into some of them that cover the vehicles that are, like we talked about earlier, that are very rare, and then others like a vehicle that never gets driven.
Oh yeah.
Well, how do you insure a vehicle that it actually doesn't have any exposure because it doesn't leave? Well, what if a meteor hits the building that it's in? Okay.
Or a fire at the building, or what happens then?
Is that going to be on the insurance for the facility there, or you're going to have another policy
That's a
for
good
that,
point.
right? Or like one that I heard was a guy that collects engines,
Really?
right? And so he doesn't actually have vehicles. Like in some cases, he's like, hey, look, I've got a room full of like millions of dollars of engines,
Oh, yeah.
right? That came out of, you name it, from like Formula One cars, old hot rods,
Oh, yeah.
you name it, right? Well, there's not a way for them to insure that. Well, there is now, right? So there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
specialty product that you can get, even stuff like that, or you have a tractor or whatever, because you start collecting things and, mini bikes, whatever. And you look at all these, weird collections across the industry now, and so there's just lots of opportunity for customized products.
Have you seen maybe it's subjective because search engine and they know what I'm looking at. But like, I mean, granted, I just have a Garmin at the moment, but like all of my friends are into collecting watches. A lot of them are getting to the point where they're buying a lot of Rolexes and stuff. Oh, sorry about that.
Right.
All good. A lot of them are starting to look at these watches. Like all these advertisements, there's a whole boutique industry now looking at watch insurance. They call it movement insurance, or what do you want to call a fancy watch on your
Yeah.
wrist. It's like, well, interesting. It's going to cover, and some of them will cover scratches because some people are so irate, like they're so sensitive. It gets a scratch on their watch, they freak out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't realize this until recently. There's a whole industry of just insurance just for your watch.
Sure. Yeah.
And it makes sense. Some of these watches cost as much as a car.
Yep.
Like to me, it's just comical because again, my watch is it's free, but I think it was like $100 or $150 list price when it came out.
Yep.
But yeah, there's a whole industry just for that.
And watches are an incredible investment vehicle as well,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, you think about back in the old days. I think when I bought my first Rolex, I paid like $3,800 for it, right?
Oh, really?
And if I was to try to replace that exact watch today, it would cost me like 11 grand.
Oh, it's insane.
It's crazy.
It's beating. I was gonna say I'm so skeptical about like a bubble in the clock or the watch industry because
Yeah.
for years it's been beating in some cases beating the S&P 500.
Yeah.
And I get a little suspicious every time Kevin O'Leary's on TV talking about it constantly, like, oh, it's a great investment.
Yeah.
Which he mostly gets it right, except for FTX. But like,
Right.
it's one of those things where
You missed one. It was a big one, but yeah.
it was a big miss. But I mean, it's true. A lot of these they're not making in mass quantities. It's a work of art in terms of it's not It's not on an assembly line. It's handcrafted. Especially, I mean, it's funny. People think Rolex is a luxury watch. It is, but then once you get into get into the hobby, you realize, oh wait a minute, that's just a lot for some people.
That's entry level,
which
right?
is insane. Like, oh yeah, that $8,000. Well, it used to be $8,000. I want to get a Submariner someday. Now it's 14. But it's like, oh yeah, now it's entry level.
Sure.
And you see people with multi-million, which to me, I'd be so nervous. I'd never have like $250,000 just on your wrist, dangling around. Like, geez, what kind of insurance policy is on that?
Yeah.
Just one knock. Whoops.
Right. Yeah.
Whoopsie daisies.
And so I think there's a whole nother conversation around that, right? Because there's so many. I mean, we haven't started talking about firearms.
Oh yeah,
right. You've got some of these people that collect, old stuff. They might have a old like machine gun that's for $100,000 gun.
Hopefully those values drop to nothing because they'll be legal again.
Oh right, yeah, exactly.
It's like a lot of people have machine guns because they don't know. Thanks to the National Firearms Act in 1934, if you want a machine gun, it had to be manufactured, registered to the U.S. government. Now, before 1986. Yeah. But that's the act that started the abomination, But now people treat it as an investment. So you go on gun brokers like eBay for guns, they'll have guns that have never been shot.
Yeah.
So it'll be like a 1980s Colt, an actual M16 full auto. They want $150,000, and it's one of the things where supply and demand, they cannot create any more for transferable firearms.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It goes up. Like a Mac 10 is now worth $15,000, which, gosh dang it.
It used to be like $3,000.
Yeah, it used to be nothing for a full auto one of those things. But yeah, now a lot of people buy those as investments, which, I don't know. I'm one of those guys where I think cars and guns should be shot and driven, but I understand, like, it's pristine. Like, part of me can appreciate it, but part of me is like, the engineers who created that are crying inside.
Right. Yeah. There is definitely that aspect of it. I think if you're going to look at it from that vantage point, there are people that do look at it from a pure investment play, right? Like, I'm going to go buy these things that I know in the past have been good investment manufacturers, right? You go buy
and Coke, and
a limited edition of something or rather, right? And there's no shortage of that kind of stuff now. I feel like it wasn't like that, many years ago. There wasn't as much limited edition back then. Really was. Now it's like limited edition because we laser engraved some name on it. Like, well, the item didn't change, right?
I joke with people in the past 20 years, if it says limited, the only thing that limits it is the number of units they can sell.
Yeah.
Like, there's a trim line. I love Toyota. They make stick shifts. That's rare. But there's Toyotas where a trim line is named limited.
Yeah.
Like, unless it's a very specific, like 1 of 10 Lamborghini or something like that, like nothing modern, especially because nowadays people collect stuff. Back then they did, and they throw it away, hence scarcity. Nowadays, if it says limited edition, I'm very skeptical again, because there's also no guarantee they won't make more.
Well, a great example is, so if you look at Ford, right, what they just did with their Super Duty.
Well, they do.
So the new 2025 Super Duty, they had a limited trim that has been around for a long time. They chose to remove that moniker, and now the top-end trim is a Platinum Plus. Platinum Plus?
That's fancy.
That's like a support tier in software.
I was about to say, was that before?
Yeah.
They have diamonds another level?
Like, it's Platinum Plus? Like, okay. So is it going to be the Platinum tailgate applique, and then it's just going to have a plus next to it, or right?
I don't know what they're doing in their marketing department.
So why would you remove something like the word limited is such a great marketing play?
I'm
exactly how you explained it, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm going to get something that's limited because it says it's limited. The reality is it's not. Well, let's take that away. Okay.
Well, it's a psychological phenomenon. Like, why is everything retail end at 99 cents?
Yeah.
Because psychologically, you'll think it's lower than like $4.99. That's not $5. It's $4.99.
Yeah.
Well, you forget about the extortion. I mean, the sales tax. Like, oh no, it's more like it's more $5.10. Just kind of ballparking there. It's like, no, it's always more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And I was gonna say, what do you like to do outside the office?
So, I do a lot of outdoor stuff. So I've done competitive shooting over the years, which is a ton of fun, getting into USPSA, PCSL. And
I forgot, what's your major firearm for that one? What's your main go-to?
So my go-to, a JP5, which is a pistol caliber carbine, shoots 9mm.
Nice.
And so I kind of went off on that tangent and used one of those for my primary. And then as far as a pistol was concerned, I've done a lot with primarily Glock, but just like really good tuned Glock.
Really? Who do you tune them yourself, or who do you trust to tune them?
Yeah, so I've done both. And the last one that I had tuned by Fowler, and Fowler is really, really great. They don't do as much Glock tuning anymore, but tuning a Glock is kind of like tuning a Volkswagen, right? I mean, there's like a lot of people make parts for them. You just have to decide which one you want to do, right? And then how reliable you want it to run at the end of the day, right? Because a Glock comes out, it's a piece of plastic with a metal frame, and you start just tinkering around with it. And 9 times out of 10, it stays as reliable as it was when it came out of the box, right?
Yeah.
Which is the beauty of it. But then there's that, 10% chance that you put something in there and it's now like not going to cycle very well, or you just now removed the reliable Glock characteristic from it.
It's a plastic fantastic.
That's exactly right. But I'll tell you, I've abused a lot of them over my years, and they just keep running, right? They're great. So a lot of that, a lot of hunting and fishing, and then just live music. So I listen to a lot of EDM, so electronic dance music. So always trying to get tickets to concerts to go. Yeah,
I like that. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's my primary, when I'm not working, doing stuff like that, and then just stuff around the house and anything that keeps me busy. I think I'm kind of like you, and if I have downtime, I got to figure out something to do with it. Yeah. So the majority of the time it's working out, and just like you, working out, running. And
what's your fitness regimen looking like these days?
So I work out about 5 days a week typically, and I'm always trying to just add new movements in, whether if I'm going to the gym or if I'm running outside or fast walking, whatever it is, but constantly trying to keep moving. And then obviously we all know very much it's nutrition, right? Oh, yeah? So nutrition's got to be in line. So I try my best to consume as much protein and carbs, so it's a gram per pound. Yep. And so that's kind of my baseline if I want to just keep the machine running, right? Oh, yeah. But if I'm doing anything like long distance running or excruciating workout, I've got to eat more, right? You got to put more in the tank to replenish it. So I've been involved doing that for probably about the last 3 years or so.
Nice.
And I mean, it really took a year to get a regimen applied, right? And change my own personal habits into like, hey, it's a non-negotiable. We go to the gym every day, right? Okay. And if we don't go to the gym, then we're going to do something, right? It's always activity. Walk the dog for a long ways, or something like that. So I ran a lot whenever I was in high school. Did a lot of cross country, so I had that kind of advantage. So I've kind of gotten back into running again and enjoying that, but haven't put the long distance in like you have. That's my goal, is obviously to kind of work up and get to a place where I can do a half marathon.
They got one December.
Yeah, no, I'm not ready yet, but that's on the goal list. Yeah.
So you got a 5K. I think they're still open for the BMW half. 5K, 10K, half.
I looked at it when we talked.
And ultra. The ultras are the crate. I don't know if I'll get to that point. Is
ultra the 100?
I think it's
or 47.
I thought it was 50 something miles. A lot.
Okay, yeah, a lot. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So that's it. I mean, I try to stay busy, and then just keeping all the wheels going.
I like it. We'll have to have you on the show again soon, man.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right.
Don't forget to check out the description and check out the Chapman Group and more. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to tune in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Give us a thumbs up, thumbs down, or additional feedback. Also, don't forget to take time to tell your family, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, heck, tell your enemies, tell anyone and everyone. Just stay safe. Y'all have a great day. Topping Talks.